Now, to kick off, I want to ensure that the session is engaging. I know we're reaching towards the end, but please do stay engaged, do stay with us. My objective is to piece the different aspects or piece the puzzles together as to what was discussed by the different speakers as it laid the foundation towards what we'll be touching on. Now, to quickly start us off, 90% of the internet, 90% of the data existing on the internet today, it's well documented that it has been generated within the past 2 years. Now, what does this mean for businesses as a whole? Now, I would like to invite over Matthew as well as Natalie. Starting with Matthew, what do you see is the role of the role of data and analytics towards driving digital transformation? Welcome, Matthew, and then Natalie will briefly wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, and good day to all our attendees as well. So I think we've heard some great examples, so my job is quite easy. So not to repeat some of our previous speakers, but the role of data and analytics in digital transformation really has to now be a data-led decision process. So transforming processes, whether they be internal to your business or external to your customer-facing processes, you've got to understand them, and you benchmark by collecting data. The specific area that my background in is location data, because if you don't understand the question of where, then how do you understand many factors, whether it be to do your customers or your internal processes? If you're running a supply chain, where do you know your products are? How do you know your supply chain is secure? And also then where are your customers? Are you selling the right products or services in the right place? So the role of data and analytics really to me is just foundational. If you're not understanding these things, your transformation may take you from A to B, but is it in the right direction? And also, if you don't take a moment to look back at A and B before you move to C, are you improving? You may think you've improved customer services, but your internal costs have gone through the roof because you're getting more inquiries, whether it be from your internal teams or from customers. I think we heard from some of the people earlier saying they were taking GoPros now out to do site inspections. Some of these things have been forced upon us, but actually simply, those things, if they'd actually stepped back before and said, well, actually, how many times are we going to site? How much is that costing us in petrol and transportation? If I'm sat in a vehicle, am I efficient? If I'm sat in an office or if I'm engaged with a customer, am I generating more revenue or more benefit to the company? So again, all data points that you need to collect, bring together, understand, and make those better decisions upon. So that's my thoughts of the role of data and analytics, and specifically location data in digital transformation. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you for that. Natalie, come in and quickly provide us with your 2 cents on the subject matter. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew, and thanks, Emmanuel, and also thanks to everyone that's attending here today. Just to add on, I've heard so many people say data is the new oil, and I really dispute that, because oil reserves are finite, right? And what we are dealing with data is an infinite amount of data sets and data points. And actually what I've seen in organizations is that it cripples us to the point that we actually cannot use it for decision making, because we haven't organized it properly. We don't understand which data points and sets relates to which other data sets. And that means that we are actually making more inefficient decisions than we did before we had all of these data sets. So key for me for the role of data and analytics is, one, to understand the data that you have. Second is to organize it in a way that it can start becoming information. And then, of course, to ensure that you're augmenting the human experience and the human knowledge and the human IP to really ensure that you get insights from that information sets. And many speakers today have spoken about culture, the role of people in ensuring a successful digital transformation. And that is absolutely no different with how we use data and analytics within our organizations. Thanks, Emmanuel.
Excellent, very well wrapped up, Natalie. Thank you for that. Now, in the very first talk of the day, we had Dennis Gorda, I hope I said his name as well correctly, where he mentioned how the success of digital transformation within a given organization is attributed towards the ability to use the given tools, which I found very profound, which bridges us to the next part of this discussion. Matthew, I wanted to get your 2 cents in terms of how important is it to a business to fully understand what the Internet of Things is and what is its role towards driving digital transformation. Thank you, Matthew.
Sure, thank you, Emmanuel. I mean, yeah, it's a massive topic, so let me just try and address it at a high level. And I'm just going to continue on from something Natalie said as a start. So I absolutely agree that, I mean, it's a great comment for speaking to your management around, you know, data is the new oil. It gets their attention, but as Natalie said, there's many, many things that are different. But I will just highlight one point that you could maybe say is similar. You know, oil comes out the ground, and it goes through a lot of things before it goes into, say, a car or is turned into a plastic bottle. So if you think about the infrastructure that sits behind the oil industry, it costs billions and billions of dollars, you know, from the research that goes into things through to building, you know, oil rigs in the middle of seas, all the pipelines, the networks that join this, you know, oil to process, then it becomes hundreds, thousands of different products are derived from oil. So just as Natalie said, you know, you can't just start by looking at oil and go, that's going to power my car. You've got to invest in an infrastructure, and not necessarily all physical, but you need to understand what you're dealing with. You need to have done that research, be looking for data in the right place. So if we come back to that point of infrastructure, you know, described simply from, you know, drilling oil from the under the sea to connecting you know, a petrol pump to your car and a petrol station in, you know, in the middle of Accra. You know, there's a lot that's gone on between those two, but the key thing there on infrastructure, if I now relate it across to the Internet of Things, is understanding where. So Internet of Things is a buzzword, but in generally it's sensors giving us information. So that might be, we've seen many screenshots of Uber today. That might be the taxi that's coming to pick you up. That's a sensor giving you information. It might be, if you're running a telco network here, I know there's users in the telco industry with us today. Yeah, you're monitoring your networks. If you have an outage, that's great. But if you don't know where the outage is, if you don't know where that taxi driver is, you know, how can you manipulate that? So we've all begun used to, and thanks to our, you know, people like Google, we're very used to looking at information on a map now to try and understand it. But that is both great and also introduces risk as well. Because if I don't understand the context, I could show you a map that shows death rate by country in a continent such as Africa. But if I don't tell you more, or if I don't normalize that data by population, the smallest country could look like it's, you know, got the best or worst health record, for example. So you've got to understand what you're dealing with. So on the IoT side, really having, as we would say, the underlying geospatial infrastructure, you've got to understand where these things are. If they're not connected to something larger, then how can you process the information that's coming back for them? So, you know, explore things like IoT in your digital transformation journeys. It's not applicable to everybody, but having the data points, let's just call it that, where you collect your key information to make those decisions upon is key. And to us, having a geographic backbone well, I challenge people to find me a sector that doesn't somewhere need geographic information to allow it to function. You know, people used to say, well, the financial sector doesn't, or money spent places. We've heard today how, you know, mobile money, you're collecting the location of those mobile money payments, or MasterCard transactions, collecting GPS coordinates and so forth. All this stuff has location. So having that location backbone to me is the fundamental enabler for things like IoT. And, you know, as I say, you go back to the oil example, you just got to think bigger picture than just looking at the things in front of you. As I say, if you look at a barrel of oil, you're not going to put that in your car. So you've got to step back and understand those other factors. A big topic, so I'll stop there and we'll cover some of the other points in the later discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. And thank you for as well packaging it in a way that's very clear and systematic. Thank you for that, Matthew. Right. Moving on to something else that I really picked up that I was hoping to as well address in the discussion at the moment was one of the speakers. I cannot quite put the name to who it was. Apologies for that. But he mentioned as to how in order for transformation to exist within a given country, it's only as good as the transformation of the people. Now, I wanted to bring in Ized to look at exactly what is the role of the public sector towards providing digital skills or digital literacy skills for the youth. What would you say is the role of the public sector, Ized? The floor is yours. Thank you. Is Ized with us in the chat room? Okay, I cannot see Ized, so we'll just move on to the. Right, I cannot find Ized in the chat room. Apologies for that. We'll just move on to the next question, which addresses Natalie as well as Michael. I was then looking to address the role of leadership within driving transformation as a whole. What would you say, in your own words, what is the role of leadership towards driving digital transformation? We can start with Michael. Michael, welcome to the floor.
Thanks a lot, Emmanuel, and to everyone else who's dialed in to this conversation and really exciting discussions we've had throughout the day. I would certainly well, I'm a CIO, so I will speak to one point, and that that I'm consistently finding speaks a lot to to what the technology leader can actually do. A lot of the hurdles experienced down the road once digital transformation initiative has been started come about from how well articulated the current state is, and a huge factor in in your current state assessment. So this is what you're probably going to do in terms of evaluating your capabilities before as you're planning out your journey. Is establishing technology debt, and this is the level of underinvestment in technology, or the sort of investments that have been made but in the wrong technology. Capturing that element as far as technology management goes, and being able to articulate that in a capabilities, from a capabilities perspective, becomes very important, and the outcome of that, and establishing that, establishing a technical debt and translating that into the capabilities the business wants to build for the future has got to be part of the roadmap, and often and sometimes that sort of left as well. We are fixing that, and somewhere down the road, you get stuck, or an integration doesn't work, and then you're sort of coming back and saying, oh yeah, we are fixing that. When you make it part of your technology roadmap, then it has the visibility it needs to have, it has the attention, and it has the right investment goes in, and everyone understands that until we are able to achieve this, until we are able to fix certain elements, then then we shall not be able, then we won't be able to get, then we won't be able to get where we need to get. The other thing that I found very, very important is to smarten the journey. And when I talk about smartening the journey, I'm talking about use of AI in security and infrastructure capacity management. Remember, what we're talking about here is how fostering an environment for rapid digital adoption. So I'm thinking of things that can help us, things can help us enhance and move faster, enhance efficiencies, and help us move faster, catch problems early. So use of AI in how technology is being managed becomes very important. The other thing I think very, very important, and sometimes not given enough attention, is communicating successes. You want to build excitement. Remember, transformation is all about change, consistently talking about we want to change how we are doing, whether we are communicating to customer service teams, whether it's whether it's back office automation. We are consistently telling people we want to change, and people need to know that what we are doing is actually having the desired effect. So having a very clear way, having a very creative, being creative in how we are communicating successes, and and involving everyone in that communication, I think helps keep the momentum, helps keep the momentum, and then keep people excited. Yeah.
Excellent stuff, and thank you for that. Really, looking at the different ways in which leaders can embrace transformation as a whole. I wanted to just dive deeper in terms of Natalie. I was hoping to quickly ask, what do you feel are specific hurdles or challenges that you'd say are common challenges leaders face when it comes to implementing digital transformations? That that you wouldn't mind sharing, that is. Thank you.
Yeah, I can actually share some practical experience in this. I think the first thing is that leaders top down need to accept that you don't know everything when it comes to this thing called digital transformation and all the technologies and the changes that goes along with it. And one of our previous speakers spoke about being very comfortable to go to the 6-year-old in the family when you need help with your technology devices, but we don't adopt the same level of humility when it comes to our corporate environments. And that's because we've been taught through our MBAs, our PhDs, etc., that we need to know everything. Just accept you don't know everything and humble yourself to the process. The second thing for me is the culture of the organization, but more specifically, the ability for leaders to create psychological safety with the people of the organization. And what I mean by that is the ability for someone to innovate, try, fail, but be okay to fail and learn from that failure. We don't embrace failure as one of the cycles of learning. And so the psychological safety is so important, because otherwise people are not going to put their necks out at all. And then as a technology professional, it is really hard to say this, and it's probably even harder to do this, but we have to start thinking about democratizing access to digital technologies and tools, and not think that it is only the job of the traditional IT department or the technology department or the digital department to do innovation when it comes to digital transformation. Democratizing access to platforms, to data, to analytics means that more people in our organization is doing it. And of course, yes, there has to be guardrails. We have to keep the organization safe, governed, etc. But we have to find ways to start getting the tools and the platforms available to everyone in our organization and not just keep it into technology. Thanks, Emmanuel.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now, something that I'm genuinely passionate about is bridging the digital divide. Now, I was hoping to bring in Ized to talk about how we can do that on a community level. However, I hope, if you don't mind me throwing this at you, Matthew, when it comes to what do you see as the importance of developing the youth in order to secure a brighter Africa?
Sure. Thank you, Emmanuel. I think Ized might be back with us, just rejoin the group. But I'm happy to start on that question for sure. So I think, I mean, Natalie just mentioned it really there. I mean, I think many managers, leaders, CIOs, doesn't matter what level, granddads, asking the younger generations, even if they're younger or older, doesn't matter at age, that, that there's a lot to learn out there. And I think if we look now, if I had to be brutally honest, there's many leaders across business, government that don't understand data. That's not a criticism of them. It's they have not been given a chance to learn it. Some have taken it upon themselves, and you can see data savvy organizations compared to none. So really, bridging that divide now is, whether we like it or not, the next generations will have to be ready to work in a fourth industrial revolution environment, whatever you want to call it. They're going to be immersed in data. So those literacy skills are important. When we look at actual literacy, though, I mean, we have our core science topics and so forth, but really, many have said the language of the next generations is going to be coding. So they need to understand the way these things are built. Some will go in and actually build them, but also others who might never touch coding need to understand the building blocks of a modern digital economy. So I mean, things that we look at literacy, to us it's data literacy. Yeah, as I said briefly earlier, understanding I could have some data, I could look at it and I could come up with an assumption. I think Natalie said, lots of data. I could look at it and make a completely the wrong decision because I don't understand the different levels of data I should have brought together for that better decision. So for us, I mean, particularly from the company I'm with, it's all about education. That is the next generation. All we're doing is getting the space ready for them. They're going to do a better job than we have in this area because they are going to be born, and we heard it earlier, digital natives. So they're going to do what we struggle with, they're just going to breeze through. But we've got to get it ready as best as we can. So our education systems across the world, we support geographic literacy, as I say, geospatial data literacy, but at the highest level, it's digital literacy. Underneath that, data literacy, and obviously we advocate geospatial or just spatial data literacy. How do we do that? It's not difficult to learn these things. It can be applied to all the subjects that we're working on already. So it's not adding necessarily to the curriculum, but more bringing those things in. That doesn't mean bringing necessarily computers into every classroom, but maths is data, science is data, you collect data. So it's really probably just emphasizing more that data element, and hopefully that will give us the foundation to start bridging that divide. It's not a quick process, and like that oil industry, it requires investment. Because if we don't have higher education facilities, if I continue that analogy, if a higher education facility is not breeding out engineers who design deep drills for the seabed, then we're not going to get oil. Same way now, if we're not looking for our education facilities to have graduates who are data literate, then we're not preparing for the future. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your words echo as well Denise's words, in which if you do not focus on transformation as a whole, you're setting yourself up to be digitally colonized. And something that you really echoed very well. Now, for the audience members, I want us to dive right into the very final question of the day. I want to ensure that I keep my promise of keeping you engaged and making it as relevant as possible. So we want to dive into the role of customer experience and how digital transformation ideally impacts that sector. Now, the role of personalization, we've seen it across different industries, and numerous examples have been provided in today's various presentation and case studies as to how that is changing as a whole, regardless of your industry. Now, ahead of the discussion, I'd like to invite Matthew as well as Natalie to talk us through, ideally just briefly, what is the role of understanding data to enhancing the customer experience. We'll start off with you, Natalie, and we'll end off with Matthew. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. This is a topic I can speak about for days, as many of my colleagues know, but I find the terms customer centricity to be, as much as we think about it being outward facing towards our customers and consumers, it's always about how much more money can we make, how can we increase top line revenue, which new products can we deploy into the market, etc., without a real need to understand what are the actual consumer preferences. And I'm going to take a practical example of a consumer walking into a store who might typically be a beer drinker. I have to punt that because that's the company I kind of work for. But we ignore the fact that that consumer could also be a mother, a father, a student. They have many other needs. And because we ignore that fact, we ignore that there are potential partnerships with adjacent industries, with other product manufacturers in the market, be it fintech, CPG, etc. And the data that is available to us already tells us what these consumer preferences are, how we can hyper-personalize offerings to them, etc. But we ignore these. And there's a couple of reasons to it. The one is that businesses are typically tunnel vision focused on what it is that we need, which is not always a bad thing. But the second one is also the lack of sharing of information. And I'm not talking around, making people's information visible on the internet and ignoring legislative requirements. But a big part of why consumers are not sharing their data with us, or not freely sharing their data with us, is because we haven't found a way yet to monetize it. So the moment that you start paying me for the information that I'm going to share with you, which is going to enable your company to provide a better quality product to me, a better quality service to me, then I may be incentivized to actually start sharing information. And when I look at the products that Esri has spoken about today around geospatial, I mean, that's going to become gold in my mind in the future. Because when we know where consumers live, where they typically move around, who is with them when they do these things, what products are they procuring when they're in townships versus when they are in modern trade outlets, then that is when we will be able to truly personalize experience as well as product. So the data exists. I think that we are too inwardly focused. And then secondly, we are not incentivizing consumers to share more information with us so that we can provide a better product and service. Thanks, Emmanuel.
Very powerful, very, very powerful. Thank you for sharing and putting it very concisely. Matthew, take the stage and yeah, share with us your 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you very much. A hard act to follow there from Natalie. She really nailed it. But I mean, I guess maybe just delving into a little bit more of it. I mean, we won't go into the sort of consumer and data protection. You know, everyone has different opinions on what they want to do with it. But you have to look at it when there's an emergency. They're very happy to know where you are. So, you know, some mobile phone companies can locate phones when there's an emergency. Otherwise, they anonymize that data. They can't tell where you are. It's just one piece of data that they have. And then they can monetize that service, maybe selling it back to the police forces so they can manage crowds around, you know, protests or sporting events and so forth. So there's all these different uses of data that you know, improve a consumer experience. To give a very extreme example, I think colleagues at one of the big tech firms in Europe at a football stadium, they were sharing the data around, and simply at the end of the football match, they knew there was a traffic jam to the north of the stadium, so they sent everyone in the stands a voucher to the coffee shop at the south of the stadium to indirectly influence their decision to exit the stadium by a different method. Now, if you told people that on the way into the stadium, would they have been happy? If you'd asked people when they got home an hour earlier because they didn't get stuck in a traffic jam, would they have been happy? So again, it's all about perception. So coming to the point of how you improve the customer experience is you've got to obviously adhere to all the rules that are applied in your geography. So I'm not suggesting not, but also look at all the information that is out there, because I think there's a lot of information that's untapped. Natalie mentioned, you know, the silo look, but if we just look at the population, I mean, just if businesses have a look at the National Statistics Agency's website for their country, yeah, it's a goldmine of information. Okay, you need to do some digging and you need to understand it, but at the highest level, there's lots of good information out there. You know, as companies find their different monetization strategies, maybe they're maybe they're seeking funds to give the data away. Some companies are giving the data away because they see the bigger picture. So is there direct monetization or is there indirect monetization? You know, if we look at commercial entity, you know, I could give away my customer information because then I get back something that means I could advertise more effectively. So an advertising agency, I'm going to tell you exactly where all my advertising boards are, because then people will select the ones that are most beneficial to them. You know, if I'm a national security agency, I'm not going to tell you where all my assets are. So obviously it comes in context. So really that customer experience can be improved by understanding data. I think the point to wrap up on, I think it was Absa Bank, you know, some of the more recent 2020 events have made people think. So if a salesperson couldn't go to the location, whatever it was, to interact with their customers, they had to think differently. So it's good that some of these things have been forced discussions, but as always, there's lots of room for improvement. So, you know, to wrap up, how can it be done? In many, many different ways, but finding those key common data sets, not being limited to your problem, but is it your team's problem, your organizations, or even your competitors? You know, so there's a reason 2 coffee shops open up opposite each other. They're direct competitors, but if there's 2 coffee shops, more people come. So again, you've got to put a different set of glasses on when you look at some of these things, because I guarantee you that information exists within the organization that could improve how you serve your customers. It's probably just not being discovered or brought together in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, as well as Natalie. Very well dissected and brought forward. Thank you for that. Now, I just had one last question, which should just take the next 2 minutes. I was just hoping to dive deeper in terms of what is one, Michael, this is the question directed towards you. I was hoping to just get your 2 cents in terms of what is one immediate action that you'd recommend a team leader or CIO, for that matter, and within a given organization, that they could implement next week in terms of preparing or setting up the right project, the right environment to encourage rapid digitization. What's that one piece of advice you'd give them to get started next week? Take you very much. Just in 1 to 2 minutes due to time constraints. Thank you. Matthew, kind of take the floor.
All right. Thanks, Emmanuel. I think I'd like to answer that in 2 components, and one is really in how we are preparing our people for the future of work. CIOs would probably have that very clearly cut out in terms of the skills we want to introduce in terms of whether it's RPA, data analytics. What I'd advise CIOs, and I've really seen this work for me practically, is to extend that training effort to the organization. There are very interesting citizen development programs out there through through different vendors, Microsoft, IBM, and this is really getting business users to get to get into building tools around and low code and no code technologies. So extending that, really thinking about the future in terms of where the farm needs to go, because it's really, skills are really important, and it's important we have all these skills everywhere. IT can't do everything, and I can sort of bear testament that that this can work. So also don't underestimate people's capacity to learn. I think the other bit that's very important, and this is for not just for CIOs, but really for leadership, is to address automation anxiety. I think that's a really big thing, and it gets in the way because then somebody is looking at this, somebody's looking at what you're introducing and wondering, is this, well, if this is automated, then then what's my future? But really, we know that what we are, the machines will not replace humans. Really, what they will do is elevate what humans can do. What humans can do is, apply judgment, apply wisdom, apply experience, things that machines can do. So I think those 2 things are really paramount for me. In as far as just building, future-proofing an organization. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I have just seen a mention that Ized has joined us. So quickly, we'll just track back very quickly. Audience members, please do bear with us. I was hoping to genuinely wrap it up here. We've had excellent discussions surrounding digital transformation, looking at it from a 360-degree point of view. However, let's just put one piece of the puzzle to just finish this up. Ized, I was hoping to invite you to the floor to look at, ideally, how is it the public sector in African countries should be involved towards driving digitization. Thank you very much, Ized, for being with us. Do take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. So one of the key things for being able to, for African communities to be part of the digital transformation is funding. So I to answer your question, I would say if government will provide proper funding for communities and for the youths, for individuals that are, and for businesses that want to be part of the digital transformation. That's a key thing that they can do. Also, government needs to invest in developing digital infrastructure and services, especially around businesses, small businesses. And I'm speaking from a Nigeria point of view. There are a lot of policies that affect businesses, small businesses, and that affect businesses being able to be part of the digital transformation, and just for the government to be able to ensure that these policies are have in thoughts with the SMEs and the small businesses, and thinking of them and thinking of how they can be part of the digital transformation, and then it will be easier for small businesses to be part of digital transformation. I'm slightly nervous because you're hurrying, and I just wanted to quickly wrap that up.
Thank you very much. Now, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. I do believe the aspect of developing the community is integral, as important as it is for businesses to understand the processes as well.
Yes,
as how
yes, it is.
I want to just, I've made one too many promises, but quickly just touch on the inclusive economy within developing an inclusive economy. Would you share the same points that you just mentioned in terms of those are the challenges that African countries will face in terms of developing an inclusive economy?
Yes, I absolutely share those same points. Policies, proper funding, infrastructure, services, especially in regards to government and businesses and general public. Yes, I do share the same points, and which is why I'm big on personal development, private development with regards to communities and people, coming together to help drive these inclusive economies, regardless of what the policies are, regardless of what the government is doing, being able to do this as privately as a community, which is why I'm big on using community to drive these inclusive economies.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ized, I know we really rushed our session, but it was very, very informative.
Yes, we rushed.
But yes, thank you for your time, and as well for the wider panelists. It's been an absolute pleasure moderating this session. I've been Emmanuel Ndonga, your moderator, and this has been the session. Back to you.
Emmanuel, thank you so much. We have got a couple of questions, so would request you to quickly run through them. So we have one question that is coming from Chris. He's asking, if blockchain technology aims to decentralize data, how do organizations who were earlier relying on centralized data held by them leverage the distributed data? So one of the panelists can perhaps take this question about decentralization of data.
I'm happy to start off. Thank you, Nisha. I mean, I guess what companies potentially need to get used to is that it doesn't matter where the data is. So we advocate sort of systems thinking. We have had, I mean, there's many different examples out there, but we've all probably know the term IQ around intelligence. EQ is a sort of more recent thing around emotional intelligence. And then I took this from a presentation in South Africa, and I'm just trying to remember the last two, but it was sort of SQ and DQ, which is systems thinking or system intelligence, and data intelligence. So really my point being, you've got to think about systems. It doesn't matter to me where the data is coming from if I can make my decision. So if it's distributed, so supply chain companies might put their supply chain ledgers out there on a distributed ledger. That makes me as a buyer of that product more likely to purchase it. So they need to see that as an investment that will improve their offering. If they don't control the data, does that make a difference? Then they are deciding to make it open. So these are big decisions and not small. But to me, the main point, it doesn't matter where the data is. We're not in a place now where you're going to hold everything. You're going to buy some data, you're going to have some data internally, and you're probably going to use some free data. So I think it was possibly referenced earlier, but for the basics of Uber is a payment API, a messaging API, and a mapping API. they didn't decide to own those three things. They used the three things that already existed and built Uber on top of it. So why do we? So to challenge that question, not so much to the person who asked it, is companies need to adapt to not be so worried about where the data is. I say rules and so forth complied with, but more the fact that they can access it. They should just be happy that it's there. It doesn't matter where it is. Thank you.
All right. There is another question, Emmanuel. This is coming from Matthew from Naja, saying the cost of managing data is becoming too much, especially if organizations have been existing over 50 to 70 years. Managing the storage, retrieval, in view of compliance, archiving is also costly. So what do you have to say about that? Because Emmanuel, you said that most of the data has been collected over the last 2 years in Africa. So what do those companies that are much older do with their data and the cost of managing data? Emmanuel, could you take this up with one of the speakers?
Excellent. Okay. On that end, I want to leave it open in terms of who would like to approach that, because I don't really want to specify individual, and maybe they may not be too comfortable answering. So I'd like to ask the panel who'd be, willing to take that up, that particular question.
I think Michael's unmuted, and then I'm happy to chip in.
Yeah. Oh, I'm unmuted. That's it.
No, I could take a stab, Michael. I was just going to say, really. So the point being there is that it is a problem. There's an absolute valid point. It's a very difficult one, but what it requires is companies coming together. And for the last time, I'm going to reference the analogy that we've touched on a few times. But these oil data being the new oil, is the companies come together, all the players, all the stakeholders come together to discuss these things. If these are barriers to economies growing, you need to come together through your business councils or commerce of chambers. It needs to get to be a bigger conversation. So all I would say is don't burden it yourself, although there's probably a more IT answer to say, well, obviously look at different types of storage, but I think it's a bigger question to say, you've got to bring these problems together because they won't be just affecting yourself and your companies. So you've got to grow them to your industry conversations or your peer conversations and raise them up to a level. Maybe it's a governmental thing, maybe it's a regulatory thing, but it's absolutely a problem. And I don't think we're going to answer the question, to be honest, but the volume of data is only going to get bigger. So it needs answering. I absolutely echo the question. Hopefully that's given some context.
Sorry, I'd actually unmuted to just something that comes to mind when I think about one of the big reasons why we, especially for companies that have been in operation for a while, is regulation. And I think just to sort of echo what Matthew has said, what comes to mind is how reasonable are some of the requirements that come from our regulators, and creating opportunities to have conversations with them on how what format, and part of the costs also in retaining a lot of this data is in actual is in a lot of regulation around data has to be kept in a hard format. Which means space, which means office space, which means storage space away from the office. So I think there's also room to review some of these requirements. Why are they there? And we know the government is not always the quickest, in terms of responding and sort of in terms of being flexible. But I think yes, it's something. There are many conversations to have. Especially with regulators around that, because a lot of data is being stored just because we've been told it must be stored for 7 to 10 years. Well, if it was up to us, we would probably store it for 2 to 3 years and destroy it.
Right. So I guess the solution is for companies to work together, industries to come together for using that data, and the regulators also to realize the situation the way it is on the ground and make some changes. Big thank you to all our speakers who joined us today. Matthew, Michael, Ized, Natalie. and Emmanuel, thank you so much for being with us today and taking us through this very insightful conversation on how data is being used, the future of data, possibilities, on how data can be used to propel businesses going ahead. Thank you so much.